Welcome back everyone, and thank you for joining me for part 2, where we're looking at practical strategies for New South Wales schools and moving beyond the monolingual mindset. So far we've explored the benefits of bilingualism and the challenges of a monolingual approach. And now I'd like to turn to some practical strategies and how we can apply these ideas in New South Wales schools. In this session, we'll start by looking at New South Wales policies on bilingualism and their practical implications for teachers. And then we'll have a think about what translanguaging is, see examples of it in action, and discuss why it works. And finally, we'll reflect on how these strategies can be applied in your own teaching. So let's begin with New South Wales policies and what support structures are in place to guide our teaching. We've talked about why bilingualism is valuable, but how does New South Wales policy and practices, how do they actually support bilingualism in schools? So you can see here the New South Wales Department of Education's multicultural plan up until 2027, and this outlines the department's commitment to fostering social cohesion and delivering equitable educational outcomes in our culturally diverse society. And there are also key New South Wales policies that support bilingualism. So the Multicultural Education policy, for example, it mandates culturally inclusive teaching and support for EALD students. There are bilingual support initiatives, such as the inclusion of SLSOs or school learning support officers who are bilingual, as well as interpreting and translation services. There's the EALD curriculum, which ensures flexibility for diverse learners and also provides specific strategies that supports English language development and the teaching of EALD. And then there's the Community Languages program, which helps students to maintain and develop their home language alongside English. So there are some important commitments to bilingualism that have been made by New South Wales education policies. And these policies influence how schools support multilingual students. One of the key aspects of the policies is recognising linguistic diversity. There's a clear acknowledgement that multilingualism is not the exception but the norm in many New South Wales schools. And beyond just this recognition, there's also targeted support for EALD learners to ensure that students learning English receive the assistance they need to develop their skills. The policies really make an effort to frame bilingualism as an asset, which shifts away from the outdated deficit perspectives and instead really places the value on the strengths that bilingual students bring to the classroom. Schools are also provided with funding and with strategic guidance to support bilingual learners, and this includes a commitment to culturally inclusive education, encouraging schools to create environments where students' linguistic and cultural backgrounds are both acknowledged and actively incorporated into the teaching and learning. And again, that Community Languages program that I touched on really reinforces the idea that maintaining a first language benefits students academically, cognitively, as well as socially. So while these policies do provide a strong foundation for supporting bilingual learners, policies alone don't drive change, implementation does. And so how these commitments translate into daily classroom practice is what will truly make the difference. It's you, the teachers in the classroom, that can really drive change. And that's what we're going to focus on next, the practical strategies that can be embedded in the classroom to make sure that bilingualism is part of the teaching and learning. In terms of key strategies for teachers, one of the most important things they can do is recognise and value students' home languages. When we see students who are speaking a second language and we acknowledge this and allow them to use it in their learning, this reinforces their sense of belonging and their identity. It can be as simple as allowing them to discuss concepts in their strongest language before expressing them in English, or displaying multilingual resources in the classroom. Another key strategy is the use of bilingual resources and technology. So there's many tools available, from bilingual dictionaries, translated materials, dual language texts, and digital resources, and these can all help students to bridge their understanding between languages. By encouraging students to use these resources and giving them access to them, it can make learning more accessible. Another key strategy is communicating with families in their home language. When schools engage with parents in a language that they're comfortable with, whether through translated newsletters, interpreters, SLSOs, and other bilingual staff, it strengthens the partnership between the home and schools. So families are more likely to support their child's education when they feel included and they feel that they can touch base with the school and with their teachers when there's an issue that arises, or when they just want an update about their students' learning. We should really never underestimate the power of communication with parents. We certainly don't with our English-speaking parents, and the same consideration should be given to our bilingual parents. And a final strategy I want to touch base with here is the integration of translanguaging strategies into everyday teaching. So this is where, rather than seeing languages as separate, we can allow students to move between languages in a way that supports their learning. So this can include bilingual note-taking, peer discussions in home languages, or scaffolded writing tasks. Some of these strategies you may already use in your teaching, but do take a moment to consider whether there's areas where you could make more space for students' home languages in learning. And we're going to explore translanguaging in more detail and how it works in the classroom, including looking at a video example. Translanguaging is about working between languages rather than treating them as separate. So in traditional bilingual education, languages are often kept distinct with strict rules about when and where each one should be used. So, for example, in some bilingual programs, students might speak their first language in one lesson and English in another without mixing them. But this isn't how bilingualism works in real life. For bilingual students, language is fluid, and a student doesn't consciously pause and think, now I'll use English, now I'll use my first language. Instead, they move naturally between the languages, using the words and structures that best express their ideas in that moment. And again, in monolingual classrooms, many students are expected to leave their home language at the door and only to operate in English. And this creates an artificially monolingual approach, and it limits their ability to process and express complex ideas. So translanguaging allows students to strategically use all their language resources, not just to communicate, but also to access content knowledge, to develop literacy and demonstrate deeper understanding. By allowing flexible movement between languages, we help students to bridge concepts, to transfer skills across languages, and to fully engage with their learning. So translanguaging ties in with core principles in multicultural schools. When we integrate translanguaging into our teaching, we're not just allowing home language, we're leveraging students' full linguistic repertoire rather than forcing them to work within an artificially monolingual environment. And this is so important in New South Wales schools, where 40% of our students speak a language other than English at home. It provides a mirror of the bilingual student's real world and helps to build a new and more positive, I would argue, classroom culture. These classrooms are more inclusive because culture is recognised rather than erased. And students engage with learning in a way that reflects their lived experiences and where they can make space for cultural knowledge, the kind of cultural knowledge that's so tied to their language. It also supports the acknowledgement of their prior learning, because so many bilingual students arrive with rich knowledge in their first language that often gets overlooked when they're only assessed or only able to use English. Students are given the opportunity to demonstrate what they know even when they're still developing proficiency in English. And it also values multiculturalism by valuing the linguistic diversity within the classroom. Because when students see their languages represented, it reinforces the idea that bilingualism is not just a personal asset, but it's a fundamental part of Australia's social and educational landscape. So translanguaging isn't just making space for first language, it's about actively using it to support learning, identity, and academic success. So as Garcia says, Garcia, who's the real guru of translanguaging, translanguaging can dissolve the rigid language boundaries while creating new learning opportunities. Where traditionally education has treated languages as separate, where we only use one language at a time, translanguaging allows students to use all of their repertoire. It also benefits all students by creating the opportunities for language awareness and deeper understanding of multiculturalism within the classroom. So bilingual students don't come to the classroom as blank slates. They already have well-developed skills in their first language that we can build upon. So they're already, in many cases, strong communicators. They can switch between formal and informal speech. They can adapt their language based on their audience and purpose. But they're just maybe not able to do it yet in English. They also have meta-language skills if they have literacy in their first language. So they already understand concepts like sentence structure, parts of speech, how language works. And these are skills that you can transfer to English to make new literacy concepts easier. And they also come with cultural knowledge. So language is embedded with culture. So students bring rich perspectives, histories and ways of understanding the world that can really shape how they learn and interact. And this can be really valuable and enriching in cross-cultural discussions, in literature analysis and in social studies. And all of these strengths can be leveraged to build students' English if we create the opportunities for them to use their linguistic resources. So what do these students need? Even though they come with a strong foundation in their first language, they still need targeted support to fully engage with learning in English. They need explicit teaching in how to transfer vocabulary, writing structures, and academic language across languages. And translanguaging strategies such as allowing bilingual note-taking or pre-writing in L1 can really help with this process. They also need help understanding Australian cultural norms. So language is, as we've said, deeply tied to culture. And so some students may struggle with informal classroom interactions, with things like humour or social expectations, or even just expressions in an Australian context. And so they need opportunities to develop this awareness in low-stakes supportive environments. Students also come to the classroom needing a cultural awareness beyond their own. So particularly students who are recent arrivals, they may not have exposure to different cultures beyond their own. So those who come from the Middle East, for example, may not have a lot of exposure to those from Southeast Asia and vice versa. And so building cultural awareness through the use of translanguaging can be a really enriching experience within the classroom. So I've talked a lot about what translanguaging is. I want to actually talk now about how it can be used in the classroom by giving some examples from speaking and writing, and then showing some actual examples. So in terms of oracy or speaking strategies, there can be multilingual partner discussions, because often students are asked to respond to questions or to participate in discussions in English before they've really had time to process their thoughts. And for bilingual students, this can really be a big hurdle. So instead of immediately requiring students to contribute in English, one translanguaging strategy is to allow them to first discuss concepts with a partner in their strongest language. So this gives students time to develop ideas before having to express them in English. It can reduce anxiety by allowing them to clarify their thinking. And that is a benefit for all students anyway. And that's why the think, pair, share strategy is so well used in classrooms, because even monolingual students benefit from taking the time to clarify their thinking. And it also leverages peer learning, because students can support each other in making sense of the content. So it's not a stress if there are some students who aren't bilingual. They can do the similar activities using their first language, which is English. But once they have taken the time to develop their understanding, they can then share their insights in English with the wider class. Another strategy is bilingual note-taking and self-talk, because often writing and speaking in a new language requires thinking in first language first. For bilingual students, allowing them to take notes and process ideas in their home language before transitioning to English can be highly effective. It can both encourage deeper thinking. It can also act as a scaffold and a reference point for students as they begin to express their ideas in English. Another strategy is comparing and contrasting across multiple languages. So this is a powerful way to develop the awareness and the understanding of meta language, and also to deepen learning. So students can compare how a particular word or phrase functions in both their home language and in English. And this can give them a deeper, a more broad brush understanding, both of the grammatical structures of English, but also of their own language, which they may, because when you learn language innately, you may not have actually thought about the structures that underlie it. This strategy also helps students to develop academic language by linking new English vocabulary to familiar first language terms. And it can also help bilingual learners to engage in higher order thinking, as they're analysing how meaning is constructed across languages and the differences across languages. In terms of writing strategies, pre-writing in home language can be really useful if students can organise their thoughts in their first language before trying to produce a well-structured piece of writing. This really supports their idea generation, as well as encouraging fluency, since they're able to articulate their ideas freely in first language before refining them in English. Another strategy is the development of bilingual glossaries and word walls, because academic language is one of the biggest challenges for bilingual learners, and by providing a glossary, students can help to develop subject-specific vocabulary in both languages. It can include key academic terms in English as well as home language, and it can also just use frequently used vocabulary. But it helps students to recognise and use those key terms more consistently in English. And the third writing strategy I wanted to touch on is scaffolded translanguaging tasks. So, for example, writing in first language, or undertaking peer translation, where students work together to translate key parts into English, or vice versa. And also refining in English, where with teacher support, students can edit and polish their English writing. So this strategy breaks down the writing process, making it less overwhelming for bilingual learners. It can encourage collaboration as students learn from one another, and it can also develop that higher level thinking skills as students engage in translation and refinement. But again, with all of these strategies, and with all teaching strategies, it's about using it in a targeted way, in a way that will be most effective and impactful for students, and which benefits all the class as a whole, and doesn't leave anyone out, including monolingual learners. But so the goal is not to replace English learning, but really to create bridges that make English language and English language learning more meaningful and accessible for our students. There are lots of resources available to you to help you to embed bilingual and translanguaging strategies into your classrooms. And they can be really effective and impactful. So here's a set of strategies that riff off the think, pair, share approach, but that build in opportunities for first language use. And so I encourage you now to pause the video here and to think about in what contexts you might use these strategies in your own classroom and whether you think they might add value. And then after doing that for a minute or two, we're going to come back and look at a video of translanguaging in action. As we get to the end of this session, we're going to watch a video of an EALD class learning about the concept of mood as part of a poetry unit. In this suite of lessons, translanguaging plays a key role in the lesson sequences, and it helps students to access and express complex ideas. As you watch, consider how these strategies create a more inclusive and engaging learning experience, and think about how you might incorporate similar approaches in your own teaching to build on students' bilingual repertoire. So without further ado, this is Teaching Mood. We've done quite a few lessons previously on poetry. What we hadn't looked at was mood. Mood is a very difficult concept for students to learn in their second language. We started by using colours. Any word that hits you in English, write it down. Any word that hits you in your first language, write it down. They had the opportunity to put down any emotions that they feel when they see a colour, firstly, and then a second opportunity to write down the kind of pictures that they see in their heads. How do you feel when you see this? Using Language 1 allowed students to really get across their true meaning in English. We then built up this vocabulary, spent a bit of time defining words and then sharing the words that they had collectively. Dark, gloomy. Dark and gloomy.
Nervous. Silent.
Silent, great one, Sherry. Silent. Lonely. And so what we thought was really important about this lesson was that we were giving students the opportunity to build language in their first language and then transfer them into English and try and develop a broader vocabulary. Then we applied them to songs. We are going to listen to 4 different pieces of music. I want you to listen to the piece of music and decide what colour it makes you think of. When you decide what colour it is, you're going to hold it up for us. They listened to 4 different songs, and the first time they listened to them, all the students thought about independently thought about what colour the song made them think of, and they put them up in the air. And we were able to talk about, well, why is that? What is the mood or the images that come up again and again when you listen to that song? They used their word banks to write down what colour the song made them think of, what mood they thought it was, and also what images went with the songs. Diana, you have a go?
When I hear this song, I think of the color blue because the mood of the song is big and cold. I see water, sea, and ocean.
Beautiful. So the mood of the song is peaceful. That was an introduction to mood, and from here we're going to go on to looking at poems and seeing how the images that poets use, as well as the techniques that they use, what mood are they trying to transfer to the audience. I found that using Language 1 was a really good way for students to tap into their first language vocabulary and then build on Language 2, so build on their English. So to summarise, bilingualism is not just about language proficiency. It's about identity, agency, and intellectual growth. When students are given opportunities to use their full linguistic repertoire, they're really empowered to take ownership of their learning. So through Language One use, students can see their first language as a valuable academic resource, not just something to hide or leave at home, and it fosters pride in their linguistic and cultural identity. By using their strongest language, their students are more likely to take initiative, to lead discussions, to help peers, and it enhances their confidence and their engagement. Expressing ideas in Language One also helps students to analyse, evaluate and synthesise information more effectively, rather than being limited by their English proficiency. And students can build on their existing knowledge rather than starting from scratch in English, and this can accelerate their comprehension of new concepts. Bilingual students also have nuanced understandings that are difficult to articulate in a second language, and strategies like translanguaging strategies can help them to fully engage with ideas before refining their expressions in English. And when students are able to think, write and discuss using all their languages, they perform to their full potential rather than being assessed solely on their English proficiency. So by empowering bilingual students, we're not just providing linguistic support. We're creating an environment where students' skills and experiences are all valued. And I look forward to discussing these ideas and giving you the opportunity for discussion when you join me on Saturday the 15th. Thank you so much.